Little light today, huh? Appellate brief, is that what's due today?
Monday.
Monday. That's. See, I thought it was baseball. My property class was not very well prepared today. Maybe this was the morning, so hopefully you were all doing better than that. I'll have your midterms done by Monday, so you can pick them up by Monday. But I'm almost done with them, so we'll be ready by Monday. By this point, you should have all made appointments to come see me. If you haven't, you're going to get a bad slot. I told you I made over 100 slots. By this point, the only ones that are still available are basically November. So it's going to be a while. So if you signed up, good for you. If you haven't, do that today. Any questions, anything in your minds? Yes, sir, David.
After today's reading, something, I guess discrimination with employment wasn't necessarily like the topic, and I had like in a previous little like law school seminar thing, like a hypo about if there was to be like a female only Uber, and if that would be considered constitutional or not, because
You mean they only pick up female passengers?
no, they only hired female drivers because their whole company was to, I guess, it was for like women who didn't want to have male drivers.
Well, we have an employment law expert sitting right next to you. I actually defer to you. You're not supposed to be here today, but I'll give you that question. What do you think?
A company that caters to its customers' desire to have only. This question comes up mainly as a so-called bona fide occupation qualification. Situations where an employer can legitimately claim that being a man or a woman is a bona fide occupation qualification and is extraordinarily rare. It's a close case because I suppose you could argue that women feel at risk when they're in a car alone with a strange man, and that's a legitimate concern. And so the precedent that you would rely on are those in which sexual privacy is important. Whether that's good enough to support your claim that being a woman is a bona fide occupation qualification, I see is close.
Yeah, I didn't tell him he was on call today, so that's why it's always ready to go. I know there are other cases involving, was it Hooters, the restaurant, where they would only hire females, and you actually had a guy bring a claim against them. So you have these sorts of cases, but with the bona fide occupational quality, BFOQs it's called, it's very hard to meet. You don't get that very often.
For Hooters, it's entertainment.
Yeah. See, that's why he's a senior professor with better choice of words than me. Any other questions in your minds? What was it? Okay, I heard it. Sound. All right, anything else? Okay, let's get started then. I want to start you off with a question over here. True, false? Okay. Which is actually somewhat along the lines of David's question, not exactly, but the same ballpark. The question for you guys is this. The government can treat men and women differently so long as it possesses a rational basis. Here's your question. True, false? The government can treat men and women differently so long as it possesses a rational basis for doing so. True or false? All right. I think I've spent only 20 people here today, so we'll start with that. The downside is when all of your classmates are at home working the brief, you guys get called on more, so be sure to tell them, when they slack, you pick it up. Where am I? Who's next? What did you put there?
So this is false.
Okay, why'd you go with false?
Well, it's supposed to be intermediate scrutiny.
What's rational basis? What is that phrase mean? We've done it a couple times, so I want to drill it again today.
It just has to be rationally related. The end
Define it without using the word. Try that. You're on the right track. Just define it without using the word.
It gives more deference to the government, and it allows them, if it's close at all, they kind of give them deference and allow it.
Does that have to be a perfect reason why they're separating?
No.
It has to be just some plausible basis, right? Kevin, what's your take here?
I picked false as well.
Okay, good. Why'd you go with false?
Because I feel like just for the rational basis that they shouldn't be treated just differently.
Okay, good. So, David, I'll ask you, would you put? Okay, you put false, and I'll ask the follow-up question. If the government doesn't need a rational basis when they're classifying based on gender, what do they need? What's their basis they need?
They don't need a rational.
Right, you're right. This is a false statement, right? So rational basis is not the correct standard. What is required? That's the follow-up question.
Like strict scrutiny, or I guess like a
No. Not strict scrutiny.
kind of. I think they say something about like a adamant government purpose, or
What? Say adamant. What word did you say?
adequate government.
Adequate. Okay, Brandon. What do you think the appropriate standard is for a gender-based classification here?
I also I put B because I understood, or I thought I understood there was that kind of classification scrutiny requires the intermediate level, which requires you to substantially relate the legislation to the government objective.
Okay, you said the rule correctly. So my question to you is this. What's the difference then between a rational basis review and this intermediate review? Realistically speaking, what does that mean if you're a judge?
I think that they give in the rational basis, they give the state deference and the benefit of the doubt.
And with intermediate?
They're a little more skeptical.
Good, very good, that's right. So the answer here is false. I hope all of you got this one right. Let's see what our results are. I feel like I wants to be a billionaire. Oh, look at this. 90%, beautiful, very good job. Good job, guys. The answer is false, but much harder than getting this true or false is understanding why these standards are actually different. And so I introduced this last time. I'll do it for you again. Right? With the Equal Protection Clause, the first question you want to ask yourself is, how are people being classified, right? What is the basis for the classification? And when I say classification, what I mean is separation, right? How is the government separating people? So I gave 3 examples in class last week, right? Age, gender, and race. So with age, I gave the example that in Texas you get your driver's license at 16, and in New York you get it at 18, whatever happens to be, right? And we said that the government has a pretty good reason, perhaps, to doubt that 16-year-olds should have a license, and that generally you defer to the government when they're making classification on the basis of age. This is what we call a non-suspect classification that's subjected to what's known as rational basis review. Okay? In other words, we're not suspicious when the government's sorting people by age. There's really nothing problematic about that. But the topic for today introduces the other sort of review, gender. And we'll develop it. It doesn't get there right away, but as it stands under current case law, a gender... Oh, yes, Crystal.
I have a lingering question about
Please.
rational basis from Fisher. So it's not...
From Fisher?
Yes.
Fisher was the affirmative action case, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So even though it is rational basis review, rational basis is just some reason.
Well, what was the classification at issue in Fisher, the affirmative action case from Texas? What were they classifying students based on?
Race.
Is race subject to rational basis review?
No.
No. We'll get there in big. Next on the list. We're on number 2. We'll get to number 3 real quick. Linger a little bit longer. Okay. So our topic today is on gender, and the court has settled on this idea that gender is what's called a quasi-suspect classification. Right? We discussed this last class. Quasi-suspect. What does that mean? Well, there's generally not a good reason to sort people based on gender. There might be. Right? There might be. But as a general matter, you shouldn't be separating people based on their gender. We give gender-based classifications what's known as intermediate scrutiny. And I'll explain these in much more depth when we go through the case, but I want to get this out of here. right? So as a general matter, the government separating you based on your gender, they gotta have a pretty good reason for doing it, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, right? But then we get down to the final one, which is Crystal's question, right? Race. We discussed this last class. Race is what we call a suspect classification. A suspect classification. And the word suspect, like suspicious, right? You're suspicious, okay, why are you segregating people on race, right? Why are you segregating people based on their national origin? Right? Why are you saying all Japanese people from these camps, right? What's the reason why you're deciding to do this? And the racial classifications from cases like Brown and Loving, we learned that you apply what's known as strict scrutiny. Okay? Now, I just wrote this out to you in 3 different bullets, right? But this didn't come about all at once. It's not like the Supreme Court one day said, aha, we're going to chop up the protection clause and this. This developed over the course of decades. I mean, like 20, 30 years, right? And the court built this doctrine up. And I'm going to teach it to you today, and you're going to learn next week why this is almost irrelevant now, because the court doesn't really care about scrutiny anymore. But for a good 20, 30 years, this was like, the mainstay of constitutional law. Okay? So everyone with me so far. Okay? This is your basic frame. You're going to have to know this cold. Right? You're going to have to just know this cold. And what I mean by knowing it cold is what are the tests for each, right? It's not enough for your exam to just say, oh, Josh, rational basis, I'm done, right? No. You actually have to apply it. Now, applying it gets a little tricky. So let me walk you through this one step at a time.
I have a question. We're going to need to know this, but it doesn't matter anymore?
No.
Okay.
The reason why is the Supreme Court doesn't really rely on the tiers of scrutiny. They've gone past that. So you read cases like Lawrence v. Texas next, or maybe 2 weeks. You'll read the Bergefell decision involving same-sex marriage. They just don't talk about this stuff anymore. It doesn't matter, but you need to know it anyway. As smart law students, you need to know the law of whether or not it's being applied. Yes, ma'am.
And these are all different reviews for
Different types of classification, right? We'll explain all the specifics, right? But race is not the only suspect classification. Religion is a suspect classification. National origin is a suspect classification. There are a bunch of them. Gender is not the only quasi-suspect classification. It doesn't come along about legitimacy. Are your parents married, right? That was a big thing, right? If your parents weren't married, there were various state statutes that made you say you can't inherit property, right? So that actually legitimacy can quasi-suspect. The bottom one's the easiest, right? Anything that doesn't fall into 1 or 2 goes into the third bucket, right? If it's not suspect, it's not quasi-suspect, it's non-suspect. That's the easiest one.
And religion is non-suspect?
No, religion is suspect.
But you choose religion. Race is...
It's a good point, yeah. These aren't always coherent. And the reason why religion is not a good fit for equal protection anyway is it's really a free exercise issue. Right? Religion's never a good equal protection fit at all because it's a free exercise fit, but you're right. Now, I think what Ashley's question, though, is hitting at is, how do you know if something is suspect or quasi-suspect? And one of the standards is, well, you're born with your race, and you're born with your national origin. Are you born with your gender? That answer may be less clear today than it was 30 years ago, right? But the question is, what makes a characteristic fit into one category or the other? And that's why I'm telling you it doesn't really matter anymore. The court's just moved away from whether you're born with it. That doesn't quite work anymore, for reasons we'll discuss next week. But let me walk you through the various tests of how these are actually applied. Okay? Whenever you're doing these sort of scrutiny, you're always comparing the means and the ends, right? What is the government trying to achieve and how is it getting there? So, we ask ourselves, right? Is the government program rationally related to a legitimate governmental interest, right? Right? Is a governmental program rationally related to a legitimate governmental interest, right? It's stated different ways, but this is one way you can say it. The words I'm putting in bold are what are actually important. The government interest has to be legitimate. Legitimate. Right? What does it mean for something to be legitimate? basically not illegitimate, which is a almost like a ducking out way of saying not crazy, right? If the government's trying to do something within their police power, it's legitimate. Protecting the health, safety, welfare, and morals of the people, it's legitimate. And what does it mean for something to be rationally related? You know, it has something to do with it, right? It concerns it. So if the government wants to make driver's license age 16 or 17, is highway safety legitimate? Yeah. Is saying we want 16-year-olds versus 18-year-olds to drive, is that a rational relationship? It is. Yeah. And you can make an argument that people who are older, more mature, and if they're more mature, they're less likely to get into accidents and the roads will be safer, right? So the rational basis standard is very deferential. As long as the government can articulate some reason why they're doing what they're doing, it's going to work, right? And if you want to be even more precise, under the rational basis standard, even if the government doesn't articulate the real reason they're doing it, right? Let's say they had a reason in the legislature, but they come to court and give you a totally different reason, right? Let's say, you know, in the legislature they say, we don't like all these young kids, they're loud music and, you know, big hair and everything else, right? We don't want them on our roads. And then the lawyer goes to court and says, no, Your Honor, we have evidence that people at the age of 16 have higher rates of accidents. Even if the reason given is not the actual reason that motivated the decision, under this rational basis standard, it's fine. The essence of this rational basis standard is deference. Let the political process work its way out. Don't second guess it. So under the rational basis review, the government almost always wins. Not always, but it's going to be a very rare case where in an equal protection case, the government loses when it's working with a non-suspect classification. The Romer case, you read next week, and the Cleburne case you read today are the few exceptions. There just aren't any exceptions. Okay? So when you're dealing with a non-suspect classification, which is basically anything except for gender and race, that's probably about it. You're going to be in this very deferential place where the government almost always wins. Do you understand? Do you want to understand this? Questions on the rational basis standard. Mark?
So is this like the Brandeis State Laboratory?
It's similar, right? That was a due process standard from Brandeis. This is equal protection. But the idea is the same, that in certain spheres, let the government work its way out, and they'll come to the best solution. And because we're dealing with a non-suspect class, the courts don't have to be quite as vigilant in policing it to make sure they're not doing something improper. Yes, sir.
So if there's legitimate government interest, pretty much the government could provide as many as they want, and if one of them works.
Yeah, and that's why I often describe litigating the rational basis test. Let's say you're a civil rights lawyer one day, right? And you're trying to challenge some law of the rational basis test. You're going to lose, right? Because imagine you make your argument in court, you submit your brief, and you say, the government gave 5 reasons, and each of the reasons is bogus, right? You submit the paper, submit the arguments. The opinion comes out the next month. The court says, aha, we thought of a 6th reason why this law is legitimate. You lose. So it's like you're submitting your papers, submitting your briefs, and then the government comes up with something else afterwards. So it's very hard to beat a moving target, but that's the nature of rational basis. The government saying, so the court's saying, there's no reason for us to be very active here. We're going to just trust the democratic process will work itself pure. That make sense? Everyone with me so far? Good? All right, let's move down the pecking order, right? The quasi-suspect standard, which we'll read about in the V Boren case in a few minutes, is a little bit different, right? It says, is the governmental program substantially related to an important governmental interest? Okay. Is the governmental program substantially related to an important governmental interest? Now, Amber, you're next. Amber, what's the difference between a legitimate interest and an important interest? What's the distinction there?
Legitimate's more broad. It's just kind of like, as long as it's not too out there and crazy, it's good. But important means there has to be like a policy that actually is going to do something towards what you're trying to achieve in some way.
Good. Very good. So you see the shift, right? This second standard, this intermediate standard, is a little bit harder to satisfy. Because when I say legitimate interest, that basically means the police power, right? Whatever the government can do is going to be legitimate. But here, the interest has to be not only legitimate, but important, right? It can't be trivial. It can't be insignificant. Now again, who's deciding what's important? The courts. So the courts can say, aha, well, that may have worked when you're dealing with age, but when you want to deal with gender and sorting people differently, whether it's for the same-sex school, the VMI, right, or the alcohol laws in Oklahoma, you have to have a bigger burden on the government. And whereas with the rational basis review, the burden's on the plaintiff. Here, the burden's based on the government, right, to articulate what is their important interest. So, in constitutional litigation, and really any litigation, one of the most important things is the burden, right? If you bear the burden of proof, it's your job to make a case. If the defendant bears the burden of proof, it's his job to defend it. And let me tell you, you would much rather have the defendant having the burden than you having the burden, right? Because that's a lot more work for you. And if they screw up, you win. Okay? So that's the first difference, right? Difference between legitimate and important. David, what's the difference between rationally related and substantially related? We have these two words, rationally and substantially. What's our difference there, David?
Substantially means it needs to be more closely related to what they're doing, as opposed to just kind of like some.
What do you mean more closely related?
The means have to fit the ends more closely.
Okay, let me give you an example, David, right? So we had our example before that New York decides driver's license at 18 and Texas decides driver's license at 16, right? What kind of classification we have there?
Non-suspect.
Non-suspect. So what's our standard review?
Rational.
Okay. And is it rational for New York to decide, we want a higher driving age because we have more crowded roads and we have, better public transportation? Is that a rational decision?
Yes.
Okay, everyone agrees with that. I think that's a fair bet. Now, David, let me give you a second hypothetical. New York says, aha, we will let females drive at 17, but males drive at 18. Okay, that's a question. Females get their license at 17, males get at 18. What's our classification there? Quasi-suspect is gender, right? Now, what does the government have to show here to support that sort of law? Right? What's their interest here? Why are they making this highway law, this driver's license law? What's their interest?
I mean, they'd have to tell a much more specific reason.
Yes, that's exactly right. The general interest here is highway safety, right? But they got to be more precise than that, right? They have to say, what's the relationship between giving licenses to guys at 18 and giving license to females at 17, right? And this word substantial means it's not just say, well, as a general matter, girls are safer drivers than boys, right? That is not going to cut it, right? That'll cut it in rational basis world, but not in intermediate world. Because I promise you, any demographic, you're going to have some 17-year-old boys who are safer drivers and some 18-year-old girls who are more reckless. It's inevitable to happen. So this requirement of substantiality means you need more than generalization. You can't just give a generalization that usually boys are more reckless than girls, right? Maybe it's a stereotype that could work, but with intermediate review, you need more than a generalization, more than a stereotype. And indeed, one of the reasons why you have this is to eliminate stereotypes. Brennan talks about this in V Boren, this notion that, girls are, in a pedestal that's actually a cage, right? That they're going to be more safe. So when you go to the quasi-suspect classifications, you need something more precise. You can't just give a stereotype or generalization. So that's why you can't have licenses 16 for girls, 17 for boys, whatever it is. Everyone with me so far? Everyone with me? Is there any hands? No? Yeah, Mark.
So the important governmental interest in that hypo is highway safety.
Yeah, and I think highway safety is going to be important, right? There's no doubt about that.
But yet the burden is on them.
Bingo. That's the big difference, right? Now the government has a burden to come forward and explain why there's a relationship between having girls at license at 17 and boys at license at 18. And they can't just give generalizations, right? That was the Craig V Boren case. I'm giving a tweak on it, that's a little bit easier example. Everyone with me?
And so where it's unlikely that under rational basis the government is going to get overturned,
Yes.
there is a chance at least.
Much stronger chance, right? Yeah, much stronger chance. And especially after the VMI decision, right? We'll talk about that later, but the VMI, the Virginia Military Institute decision, I think shifted the game a little bit. Good question, thank you, Mark. Anything else in intermediate? All right, the last one is by far the easiest. So we ask with strict scrutiny, is the governmental program narrowly tailored, right? Narrowly tailored to serve a compelling governmental interest. Is the governmental program narrowly tailored to serve a compelling governmental interest? Presents Boone. So let's just compare this, right? What's the difference between an important interest and a compelling interest?
Compelling also has like a time kind of element in it.
Like urgent, right?
Yeah, now.
So like what would an example be of like a compelling interest that we've studied so far this term?
Well, I mean, I guess they kind of use it for the Japanese concentration.
Exactly what I'm thinking of. National security, right? So I mean, when you think of like highway safety, is that compelling? Probably not. Probably not. If you think of, invasion by foreign attack, national security, is that compelling? Probably. Even though more people will die of car accidents than will die of foreign attacks, but we can put that aside for a moment. People have a natural inclination to fear the extravagant rather than the more mundane. That's an aspect of human nature. You're more likely to be killed by lightning than by terrorist attack, but we'll go with what we got. So we say compelling means something that's really important. I think you said urgent, right? There's some time-sensitive matter to it, right? There's a very imminent aspect to it, right? Brittany, what's narrow tailoring? What does that mean? Narrowly tailored. Let's slow that word. What does it mean for being narrowly tailored?
I would say that it wouldn't apply. Maybe it wouldn't apply to many other programs. Would it be specifically for that issue?
Oh, good. Give me a little. You're on the right track. Give me a little bit more, please.
So,
give me an example, maybe.
like for instance, even with the
Use core mops. We'll go with that one. Yeah.
That it specifically for that race, maybe.
Okay. Well, let's go back to core mops for a minute, Brittany. Right. In that case, remember, basically the sign said all people of Japanese ancestry report to these facilities to go to the camps. Right. What might have been a more narrowly tailored way of eliminating the threat of sabotage and espionage, rather than saying all people of Japanese ancestry come to this location? What might have been a more narrowly tailored way? The top of the. How could the government have achieved their compelling interest in a more narrowly tailored way?
Without excluding everyone else,
Yeah. How could they have done it more precisely? Let's use your word. Use the word precise, right? How could they have done it more precisely? Melissa, you want to take a step?
I'm not entirely sure about that, but when you're talking about narrowly tailored, what I remembered it as was how the educational benefits flow from diversity. That's
okay.
I'm not really sure it pertains to.
All right, so let me try this, right? This is actually a custom suit. It's not expensive. So I was in Hong Kong last year, right? And they can make suits for you really cheap. And they measure you, right? And I have very long arms, and no suit ever fits me. So either the sleeves are too long or too short, right? This suit's perfect. It is literally narrowly tailored to my body, in a literal sense, right? It fits me perfectly. It's Goldilocks, right? Not too hot, not too cold. Think of when you're doing strict scrutiny, you're thinking of a tailor. in the same exact fashion, right? They're fitting the policy to the exact need at hand, right? So, you know, my arms are however many inches, and you're fitting the suit exactly those number of inches. So let's use Korematsu for an example. Korematsu, right? Instead of having this blanket policy saying all people of Japanese descent show up to these camps, right? They could have said, all people of Japanese descent submit to a loyalty oath. And if you pass a loyalty oath, then you go on your merry way. And if you don't, you go to a camp. Now, I think that probably would still been unconstitutional, but you're tailoring it more narrowly, right? If your concern is Japanese sabotage, Japanese, spies, there are ways of addressing that, short of locking up 100,000 people in a camp in the middle of the desert. And everyone, I think, would agree with that, right? I think the right way of doing it is not having this policy at all. But if you're going to have racial classifications, you have it more narrowly tailored. Alyssa mentioned the affirmative action cases, which is exactly on point, right? If your interest, your compelling interest in this case, are the benefits that come from diversity in education, right? Quota will not cut it, right? Because a quota is not narrowly tailored. It's basically like a blunt way of getting more minorities in the classroom. But the one that was upheld was at the Michigan Law School, right? Holistic, right? Look at different factors. It doesn't use race so explicitly. It uses race as one of many factors. What was going on in Justice O'Connor's opinion in Grutter with the law school is how do you have a more narrow tailored use of race? Just think of the suit, right? Not just a quota where it's a one-size-fits-all. Fit it to the exact needs you're looking for. So the entire issue of strict scrutiny is narrow tailoring. And it generally means when the government's dealing with a racial classification, they got to be real precise. They have to be very precise. And let me give you guys a preview. As a general matter, if you're dealing with strict scrutiny, and the government's saying, here's why we want to divvy people up based on their race, the government's going to lose in almost every case. And there are only a handful of cases I can think of in American history where the court has upheld a racial classification. One is the biggie, right? Korematsu. They upheld it. They said that the compelling interest here is so damn important, we'll let it go. The other is the affirmative action cases, right? Fisher, Grutter. And they said that the benefits from education are so compelling that we will uphold it. And remember what Thomas said, right? Thomas, like, wait a minute. How is educational benefits at a state law school compelling, right? If that's what compelling means, then anything's compelling. Which is why Thomas accused the majority in Grutter of watering down strict scrutiny. But this is the standard, right? And you have to understand, as a general matter, once you get to strict scrutiny land, the government's going to lose. Okay? Everyone would think. Yes, sir.
So is Thomas that argued like it wasn't compelling to the state because most people even went out of Michigan?
Yeah.
So does it have to be like the government protecting their citizens, technically their law schools?
You know, your question is a very good one. The courts never really define what compelling means. And, I think Boone gave a decent definition. He said it's urgent, right? Timely. What O'Connor basically said is, well, important, compelling, potato, potato. Right? So everyone with me so far? Now, Kelsey, let me ask you the harder question, right? This is our lead-in for today's lecture. Why are racial classifications worse than gender classifications, right? In other words, why is the court going to be more skeptical of a racial classification than the gender-based classification? Why? Why is it more tolerable to separate people based on their gender than based on their race? Based on just this framework right here. Not an easy question. I know it's not.
Race is something you really cannot change. Born with it in gender. I don't want to say there's some true stereotypes, but maybe they can bend the rules a little more based on gender studies versus race.
Oh, so there might be a greater justification for gender classification than race. Is that what you're getting at? Cortland, what do you think?
I agree with Kelsey. I think today you could technically change your gender. So it's not like race. Race is near born, you can't change.
The transgender question actually is one of the reasons why I think this framework is no longer for our day. It doesn't fit, right? And you'll see this when we do the Bergefell decision in a couple weeks. This framework doesn't neatly fit some of the stuff that's going on today. But let me just use one example that Justice Ginsburg, Brittany, you want to add something?
Well, I was just gonna say, even when it comes to gender, they have laws that are by weight class. And
By weight? Oh, you mean like how much you
yeah,
weigh?
like how much you weigh. And so like when you have races, you have people of all different weights. When you have men and women, a lot of the time, on average, men are bigger. So there's more ways to.
Are you talking about like physical fitness standards?
Yeah, like I'm just saying, like for when you're looking at the interests, like the important interests in the narrowly tailored, you would have to be more narrowly tailored when it came to race and to gender.
Actually?
Well, going off of what Brittany's saying, whether you're white, black, Hispanic, Asian, whatever you are, a man is a man is a man, is why there's a difference between the gender and the race classifications. But there's some things that women aren't physically capable of doing as compared to a man.
So I think both of you made a similar point. Justice Ginsburg's opinion in the Virginia case, which we'll get to in a bit, acknowledged that even though you can allow women to be admitted, the physical fitness standards might not be the same. Right? So let me give you an example, right? Let's say you have basic training in the Army, right? And let's say they had a standard that African American cadets must do 50 push-ups and white cadets must do 40 push-ups, right? Both male. I think people probably generally agree that a black man and a white man are able to do the same amount of push-ups. They show the same standard. Now, different standard. Women have to do 25 push-ups and men have to do 50. Right? I don't know the exact numbers, but I do know that in general, in the military, the standards are not the same. Also, instead of doing the pull-up, do the flex arm hang, right? They're different standards. Is that going to be based on the acknowledgement that women are inferior or some sort of an animus, or just based on the fact that women might not be able to do the same standards? This comes up a lot in fire departments. There's a lot of litigation over this, where fire departments don't admit women. And the physical fitness tests come up as a significant issue. So there's a lot of litigation. In New York City in particular, this comes up quite a bit. So I think what 3 or 4 of you are getting at is there might be some, how do I put this, non-evil reason why, right? You have gender-based differences. Whereas if there's a racial difference, it probably has a more, we might say animus, right, or more discriminatory motivation. So the reason why this middle tier, I think, is developed is saying, well, there might be a real reason why you want to separate men and women, but still be on guard about it. But there's no good reason to separate people on their skin color. Right? And indeed, before the cases in the 70s, Frontiera and Craig V Boren, gender was lumped into rational basis review. You will trace that here. So before the 1970s, gender was just the same as age. And you could treat a person, men, women, 16, 17, just the same. Crystal.
So now is the exception to that in Fisher when it is affirmative action, because then they just look at whether or not the law was in good faith.
Affirmative action is sort of a gray area. It doesn't really fit into the doctrine, which is why I'm telling you this doesn't matter anymore, right? If you take strict scrutiny seriously, as it was discussed in a case like Loving versus Virginia, the Grutter case doesn't quite fit. Now, I think what Justice Ginsburg would say is that there's a difference between using a classification to hurt someone, like Loving, and using classification to help someone, like in Grutter, right? So if you're using a benign racial classification to help people admit to school, it's a different standard. The court hasn't adopted that in any meaningful sense, but that's perhaps one distinction. Make sense? Yes, sir, David.
And I mean, so would Justice Thomas disagree that like all classifications
Yes.
of people, like whether for good or bad, are hurtful?
Yeah, I mean, the Thomas dissent in the Grutter case says it makes no difference whether you're helping or hurting someone. You're hurting them by classifying them on basis of race. Which is all you prohibited. That's Thomas.
So like with the United States Tennis Association's decision to make the championship prize of the U.S. Open the same for men and for women, despite that men have to win 3 out of 5 and the women have to win
Is that
2 out of
a
3.
government organization or a private organization? I don't know the answer.
I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
I guess the argument based off of what you taught thus far is that it takes an equal amount of effort for the female biology to take 2 out of 3 as it does for the male biology to take 3 out of 5, and that therefore the prize money should be the same?
I'm not familiar with the structure, so I can't really answer the question, but the general norm is if we use something like maybe firefighter training or basic training, there often are different standards for female and male cadets. That much I can say, certainty. Yes, Emily?
This just makes me think, and I agree, like let me just ask my question or make my comment. This makes me think of Bradwell versus Illinois.
Well, remind everyone what Bradwell is. You remember it.
Female lawyer wants to be a lawyer.
Good, yeah.
And she can't. She can't pass the bar, or she can't take the bar.
She can't even sit for it.
Right. But yeah, just as kind of a slippery slope, like when you say women aren't physically equal to men, which does have some truth, maybe, I don't know. You can make the same argument for, that's what they did.
Mental, right?
In that case, they said women belong in the kitchen, they don't have the same capacity to...
And that's a perfect segue to our first case. Can we go to Frontiero now?
Yes.
I think it's a perfect segue, right? So Emily's question is this, right? Maybe a woman might say, I like this classification. I don't want to have to do 50 push-ups. I only want to do 25. Then someone says, screw that. I'm a human being. Treat me the same, right? So the cases in the 70s, Frontiero and Richardson, these are both cases brought by the American Civil Liberties Union, the Women's Project, which was headed by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the future Supreme Court Justice. And she argued a couple of these cases. And Ginsburg had a very specific strategy, right? She didn't want to bring the case where the woman was being discriminated against. Instead, she wanted to bring the case where a man was discriminated against. Whoa. Why? All my justices were men. And she made the decision, which I think was the right one, that she's more likely to get 5 votes if it's a guy getting treated unfairly than if it was a girl getting treated fairly. I think it's a brilliant strategy. I mean, we talk about this 30 years later. I think it worked. But these were very specific cases. So Frontiero and Craig were cases where the woman was actually treated better than the man. Okay? I think, Mark, you're next. You want to give us the facts, please, in Frontiero?
Sure. Sharon Frontiero was a lieutenant in the Air Force.
Good.
And she wanted to get quarters allowance.
Okay, well, what's a quarters allowance? Just explain that briefly.
Where you could live off base and the government will provide you with subsidized living. Or I guess you could live on base in like 801 housing.
Okay.
And she also wanted her husband to be able to receive the medical benefits.
Very good.
If it was gender reversal, then if it was her husband who was the airman, then she would have gotten these benefits, no questions asked.
Very good, very good. All right, so here's a setup, right? This is actually a picture. This is Sharon Frontiero and her husband Joseph. And this case was like the reversal. Traditionally on the military base, you'd have the husband enlisted, right? The husband was an officer. He was serving. And the wife would be at home, as Emily said, taking care of the kitchen, right? Whatever. But this was the opposite, right?
What are you doing there?
This was the opposite. Right here, Frontiero was actually a commissioned officer. And her husband was, I think, getting his degree. So he wanted to get the same sort of stipend, the same sort of allowance that a female spouse can get. Now, the way it worked is if there was a wife on base, she got the allowance, no questions asked, right? No questions asked. But if it was a husband who was serving as a dependent, right, they had to meet certain conditions. So it was harder for the husband to get this allowance than for a spouse who's a wife to get the allowance. So again, the plaintiff here wasn't Sharon, right? The officer. The plaintiff here was the husband, Joseph. And this was Ginsburg's strategy. Now, before this case was decided, the justices had said that a gender-based classification is given rational basis review. Okay? So, Crystal, let's just try and imagine in our head, right? You're the government's lawyer, right? Defend this policy. Why would the government want this policy of requiring men to meet some requirements, but for women just handed out, no questions asked?
I guess in that day and age, I guess it's the 70s, but typically men are able to make more money than women, I guess is the perspective. So you wouldn't want a woman in the Air Force to get all these benefits and have a husband who's making a ton of money and they just reap all these benefits.
So what's the concern? I think it's a very good answer. What's the concern about why you would make a man have to go through the paces, right, whereas a woman wouldn't? What's the presumption what the woman's doing? What would you presume the woman's usually going to do? Emily?
Stay in the kitchen.
Stay at home, right? But what do you presume the man's going to do?
Work.
So their concern here was fraud, right? Everyone see that? The concern was fraud. That they almost presume that, of course, the guy's going to be working, and by not requiring him to meet any specifications, he'll double dip, right? He'll get a salary, and he'll get this allowance, these quarter stipends. So the government said, okay, if you're a woman, we're going to assume you're at home or whatever in the kitchen, you get your money, no questions asked. But if you're a guy, we're going to check out if you're committing fraud against the U.S. government, right? Now, that works under a rational basis, right? Let's go back to our test, right? Under a rational basis review, is preventing fraud legitimate? Yeah, of course it is, right? Is requiring the person more likely to commit fraud rational related? It is. It is, right? Doesn't have to be perfect. You can base it on generalizations. You can base it on stereotypes. That's what Crystal and I were talking about. The stereotype is a man will likely work and a woman will likely be at home. But that's not how the case shakes down. And what makes this case a little bit difficult to study is that there's no majority opinion. The opinion by Justice Brennan is called a plurality, right? Only 4 votes. You have Brennan, Douglas, White, and Marshall. And when you have only 4 votes, it's not a majority opinion. Now, I think actually next, what standard review would Justice Brennan throw here?
Strict scrutiny.
He just thought strict scrutiny, right? This is Brennan being Brennan, right? He's like, screw it, I got 4 votes to do what I want. He would apply strict scrutinies, and he would treat race as no different than gender. Now, actually, what's Brennan's rationale for treating race, gender on the same trajectory?
That it's an immutable characteristic.
Immutable. What does that word mean? Immutable.
Something you're born with. But you
Born with it. Yeah, you can't change it. So Brennan would say that there's no difference between race and sex because it's immutable. It's a very famous phrase. He said it's determined by the accident of birth, which is a bizarre way of describing birth, but you know, the 70s, right? By the accident of birth, and you're getting imposed disabilities because of your sex. Okay. So again, 4 votes for strict scrutiny, right? But that's not a majority opinion, and because there's no majority opinion, the rule is not changed. The rule is still after Frontiero rational basis review. Okay? But then I want to jump ahead to the next case, right? Craig V. Boren. In this case, Brennan got a 5th. He didn't get a 5th vote for strict scrutiny. He got a 5th vote for intermediate scrutiny. And that's the important point. Justice Brennan was very famous for cobbling together 5-member majorities. He didn't much care what the majority said, but he wanted a majority. He would often tell his law clerks the most important number of the court is 5, because with 5 votes you can do anything you want. And he meant it, and he did it better than just about anyone else in the 20th century. So he got to his 5th vote. So, Emily, you want to give us the facts, please, in Craig v. Boren?
Sure. Here in this case, there's an Oklahoma law that prohibits the sale of beer to boys.
Well, not all beer. What kind of beer are we talking about?
It says non-intoxicating 3.2%.
Yeah. Anyone know what this 3% beer is? Anyone from Oklahoma?
That's Oklahoma beer.
You know about it? Near beer. It's basically it's a low alcohol content, which I've never had it, but I understand it doesn't really get you drunk if you drink a lot of it. But it's usually cheaper. Okay, Emily, go on. So what was the regime in Oklahoma for this 3% beer? Who was allowed to have it?
Yeah, women.
Okay.
Were.
At what age were women allowed to have it?
18.
Good.
And then boys had to be 21.
Very good. Now, Emily, you're a rational person. Why do you think the legislature enacted this different standard for men and women having?
Well, because 18-year-old girls are more responsible.
Is that true?
I don't know.
I don't know. Smart answer, right? Because you knew what my follow-up was going to be, so you're ducking that. So, right, it was based on a stereotype, right, that 18-year-old girls are more mature and more responsible than those dastardly boys who are hot rodding and doing these awful things, right? Whatever boys do. This was challenged in court. And again, it wasn't challenged by a female. It was challenged by a guy, right? By a guy saying, hey, wait a minute. She can get beer. She can even buy me a beer, but I can't buy it myself. So I have some pictures here. This was actually taken on the 20th anniversary of Craig V Boren. By that point, Ginsburg was already on the court. The actual place where the beer was purchased was called the Honk and Holler Grocery. And this is actually a picture of the store. I'm sorry?
It's fancy.
Oh, it's beautiful, yeah. Top of the line. One of the weird aspects of the case is you actually had a liquor store or a grocery store asserting standing on behalf of men who want to buy alcohol. It was a strange idea. Why can't you use that for credit? Anyway. This is, where is he? This is Craig, who was a college student at the time, Curtis Craig, but he was the titular plaintiff of the case. Okay, so we get the facts? All right, so here we have it. If you're a girl, you can buy beer at 18. If you're a guy, you have to wait 3 more years. There's nothing in the law that says the girls can't give the beer to the guys, which I'm sure happened all the time. Just they can't buy it themselves. Frontiera, which had decided, only had 4 votes. So at the time, only rational basis review applied. Okay, so Shivan, walk me through Justice Brennan's majority opinion analysis, please.
So, once again, he kind of tries to apply strict scrutiny from Reed again.
How'd that go?
Not very well.
Not well.
Because then the state starts introducing all these like weird statistical surveys.
Oh yeah, okay, well, let's talk about statistics. What are these surveys that the state introduces?
Okay, so the first one was that 18 to 20-year-old males have more arrests for driving under the influence than females in the same age range.
Very good.
The second one was that there were more males aged 17 to 21 that were killed in car accidents than females of the same age range.
Very good. I mean, that's not good, it's awful, but you're giving me correct answers.
Third, there was a random roadside survey in Oklahoma City that revealed that young males were more inclined to drink and drive than females.
Okay, so surveys, okay, good. What else we got? Just round it out. Anything else?
There's 2 more. There's one for significant increase in arrests for driving under the influence overall, all across the country. And then the last one was, let's see, there were stats gathered in Minnesota and Michigan indicating the pervasiveness of youthful participation in motor vehicle accidents following the consumption of
very good. All right, so let's go back to our test here, right? Under a rational basis review, there's no obligation for the government to provide any sort of evidence, much less statistical surveys, right? If they just give a general thing, say, yeah, we want highway safety and it makes sense, that's good enough. But here, Oklahoma takes this case very seriously, and they introduce a lot of evidence to show that young men are more likely to drink and drive, young men are more likely to get into accidents, and more likely to get killed in accidents, right? So is keeping people alive on the roads an important governmental interest? I'd say so. But the question is one of tailoring, right? Is there enough of a relationship between highway safety and gender to support this form of discrimination? Right? So Kelly, what does Brennan say here? Is it enough to justify this form of gender discrimination? It's not. Why not? What does Brennan do with all these surveys? For us, it seems like a lot of science, right? Math is good. What does Brennan do with the surveys?
It makes no effort to relate their findings to age, sex, distinction.
What does that mean?
So he's saying that
Trying to take a step?
he said that it didn't show a substantial relationship between.
Okay, so the word here, substantial, right? That's the key word. Why is it not substantial? That's my question.
I guess because the connection wasn't.
Good.
The connection didn't suffice to
The
show.
connection wasn't strong enough. Very good, right? So here's what Brennan says, right? In a given year, 0.18% of females and 2% of males in this category were arrested. And what Brennan says is, if you're going to use gender, you need more than a 2% correlation, right? This fit is not strong enough, right? You need 0% of girls were arrested, 80% of guys, right? You need something very significant. That is, these sorts of gender-based relations are so tricky that you need something a lot stronger. And he says that the surveys do not adequately justify these gender-based laws. You can't use sex as a proxy or a justification for this. And indeed, one part is true. Minors can still drink it, even if they're not driving. Right? The girl, 18-year-old can give the guy a beer just fine. Right? There's nothing in the law stopping that. So you can't rely on statistics. I'll just pause to note, remember in Brown, that footnote about social science, how we're doing the doll test, that's really important? Here that just kind of goes out the window. Right? That's not important. Brennan also makes a big deal about social stereotypes. He says, look, this is based on the idea that young men are reckless, but their female counterparts are chivalrously escorted home, right? That if a girl is driving drunk, gets pulled over, they're not going to arrest her. They're going to take her home to her father, right? But if this young, strapping man, this DUI and driving drunk, they're going to arrest him from the paddy wagon, right? So Brennan's saying it's even possible these statistics are skewed, that there are plenty of girls driving drunk who are less likely to get arrested. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I don't know. Brennan provides no evidence of that. But he's saying that these statistics are not enough. So at this point, you should be asking yourself, Josh, wait a minute. How is this any different than strict scrutiny, right? He lost on calling it strict scrutiny in the previous case, Frontiero. This looks a lot like strict scrutiny, right? You're looking whether it's narrowly tailored, right? Not just substantially related, but is this like a custom fit suit? Does it fit perfectly? And Brennan in footnote 14, I want to put a star next to that in your reading, footnote 14, he says, well, I'm not going to deny that, this is pretty strict. Is there no footnote 14? Oh, it's in the new book, I'm sorry. I'll read it to you. There is a footnote 14 in the case, I promise you. It's in the new book, so I apologize. It's almost written, I swear. It actually the new book goes to print on Monday or Tuesday. So this is my last round of corrections for this. I found a couple typos in the reading for today. So he says, while I would not endorse the characterization, right, and dividing equal protection analysis, candor compels the recognition that the relatively deferential rational basis review applies with a sharper focus when we address a gender-based classification. So he's saying it, right? When gender's involved, we give it a little more oomph. He doesn't call it strict scrutiny, but it looks an awful lot like it. Okay? And this is the first case where this intermediate standard is introduced. Crystal.
When reading this case, and since it was Justice Brennan again, I couldn't figure out why, because there was age and gender issues.
Yeah.
So why didn't he just focus on the age and not apply rational basis?
Because he wanted to move the law. I mean, again, this is Brennan. I don't say this disparaging, because he was very good at what he did. And he got 5 votes, he got his 5 votes. And what he wanted to do was create this idea that gender-based classifications cannot stand. That's the reason why.
When there is 2 issues, like if there is a race and a gender issue, do we apply strict scrutiny?
Well, I think so. To answer your question a different way, no one was arguing that the state lacked the power to make the drinking age 18 for anyone, right? It was saying they had to make it the same for men and women. So let's say after this case, right? What were Oklahoma's choices after this case was decided? What could they do?
Make the drinking age 18 or 21 for everyone.
Yes. They have to use the same age for everyone. And if they made it 18 for everyone, that was fine. If they made it 21 for everyone, that's fine. No one's doubting whether the state lacks the power to make the drinking age 18. Like you often see, what's the age to buy alcohol now? 21, right? You can go, you can fight for your country and die at 18, but if you buy a beer, you can be 21. I'm sure you've all heard this, right? Is it irrational to make the drinking age 21? Of course not. It might not be nice if a bunch of teenagers want to drink in college, In fact, there's a lot of evidence that if you made the drinking age 18, there'd be a lot fewer deaths by alcohol. That people who drink in bars where there's supervision and not in basements. There's a lot of evidence that raising the age of 21 is actually very bad for alcohol, because that way teenagers, they binge, or they just go to a bar and buy one beer, right? You actually drink more when it's illegal. You buy it in bigger quantities, and you get it in danky dormitories and frat houses. So there are numbers on this. I'm not making this up. It's a very bad idea to have a 21 drinking age. Very bad idea. But I won't get the majority opinion. And in the very last sentence, Brennan introduces the test, right? If you jump over it, you'll miss it. He says, in fact, when it is further recognized that Oklahoma statute prohibits only the selling of beer to young males and not the drinking of their beverage once acquired, and here comes the test. He says it. The relationship between gender and traffic safety becomes far too tenuous to satisfy Reed's requirement that, here it is, the gender-based difference be substantially related to the achievement of the statutory objective. That's where the substantial comes in. I know the word important's not there. That comes in later.
That's enforcement, right?
So that's not in the book.
Yeah.
That's not in the book either? Oh, it's in the next edition. I'm sorry. There are a lot of edits in this case I don't like, but I fixed it. I fixed it real good. But I read it, just now you have it. The third edition's going to be great. Just wait for it. You're going to be out of this class, but you're going to love it. It's Powell's conferring pains in the book, right?
What?
No.
Just Rehnquist. Okay, let's try Rehnquist then. Okay, who's up? Jay, what's Justice Rehnquist saying here? Oh, okay, I'll skip over you. That's fine. That's fine. No, I don't want you to hurt yourself. Yeah, John. What's Justice Rehnquist saying here?
Right off the bat, he's happy that you're stepping off of strict scrutiny for gender-based classification.
Okay, good.
I think that he would prefer that you go all the way to a rational basis rather than kind of.
How does Rehnquist respond to the fact that the government gave all these statistics and surveys and they actually did their homework, right? What's Rehnquist going to argue there?
That's rational basis. That's enough. There's a connection there.
That's more than enough, right? Rehnquist is saying that this is a court. This is not like a PhD course in statistics, right? That judges should not be demanding such precision about what the level of correlation is, right? If the government puts forward a general gist to explain this, to give a good reason why, that'd be enough. In fact, Rehnquist cites, remember the case of Williamson versus Lee Optical, right? This was a case involving, if you're an ophthalmologist, you can fit the frames in glasses, but if you're an optician, you can't, right? Doesn't matter if it makes sense. Matters, is there some rational basis why? But Rehnquist says, look, if you're giving numbers, that's enough. Even if the numbers aren't even accurate, it doesn't matter. You okay? Drinking water or something? Okay, thank you. Rehnquist makes a second point that you may have glossed over, but he argues that it's wrong that a man is bringing these claims. Anyone knows that? He says that? Yeah. He says, this is not for a guy to bring, that these sorts of claims should only be brought by females. In other words, the fact that a man's being injured raises zero constitutional problems. This argument would disappear pretty quickly. I don't think he made it again, but at least in this case he raised it. Okay. All right, so any other questions on the Craig V Boren case or on Frontiero?
On Frontiero,
Yes.
I wanted to ask, do you think that could have even been the standard set the way it was to keep women from joining the military?
Oh, what do you mean?
Because if it was, or like a married woman, because if it was such a hassle for her.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That it was trying to keep women out of the service. That way, their husbands would have to be put through the paces. Let me answer the question differently. The military often had a lot of benefits for the spouses, like they would have job placement and the like. And if I had to guess, they probably weren't too eager to help put men into jobs when they had a limited number of positions. They wanted to put the wives into jobs. So this could be a general sense. Sharon Frontier was probably one of the first commissioned officers who was a female in the Air Force. This was fairly new back then. And so I think the general norm was they didn't really want women in the service. So maybe you're on something. I don't know. Maybe that there was deliberately putting barriers to discourage women from entering the service. Make sense? Mark, you look pensive.
No, I agree.
Okay.
It was also
Okay? Yeah, thank you.
I know it was also the time that the Army had a separate, they had a women's Army Corps, which was actually a separate part of the service just for women who wanted to be Army officers.
Yeah, and to this day, there's still a pretty raging debate about whether women should allowed in combat. It's a live issue today that's not been resolved. Right, so here's a question on Frontiero. So the holding of Frontiero can be summarized basically in this one sentence, right? When you have these sort of quasi-suspect classifications like gender, you ask yourself, what is the relationship from the means to the end? It's got to be substantial. And the government interest must be important. Now, candor compels, as Justice Brennan would say, that there's not much of a difference, there's not much daylight between substantial relationship and narrowly tailored. There isn't much, and I wish I could tell you the difference. The VMI case makes it a little more precisely, but there's not much of a daylight between the two of them. Why, again, do we not just lump gender into strict scrutiny? Maybe there's some reason why physical fitness standards, bathrooms, changing facilities, why you might want to preserve segregated sexes. I make no predictions where that goes in 20 years, but at least the current doctrine, that's where it fits. Any other questions on Frontiero or Craig V Boren?
Wait, so you're saying, when you were talking about bathrooms and locker rooms, you're saying if there wasn't the middle tier, then bathrooms would be, like, you couldn't have female bathrooms? Or male bathrooms?
Well, let me put it like this. You ever go to a restaurant with unisex bathrooms where there's just stalls, but all the stalls are their own rooms? So you don't have a separate. I'm sorry, what?
It is disgusting.
It's disgusting. Like,
anyway, my point is, if you are required to have narrow tailoring, right? Yeah, guys, one at a time, please, one at a time. If you're required to have narrow tailoring, then perhaps you could argue you don't need separate men-female rooms. You just have a bathroom, and each stall separate. You wash your hands together, and that would be more narrowly tailored to serve the government's interests. Yeah, Amber.
Wouldn't you also have the United States versus Virginia with the school that technically it's more narrowly tailored? That they would have to share dormitories as well. Women would have to.
Well, what does Ginsburg say about sharing dorms? She actually addresses this.
She does talk about how it's not that they would have to build new dorms and new.
So even in VMI, Ginsburg acknowledges that you have different showers, different locker rooms, different sleeping quarters, right? But there's a fairly credible movement. Law professors write about this. God, don't read what law professors write; it's bad for your health.
Didn't
but
you
that.
write the next book?
I'm sorry.
Didn't you write the next book?
Don't read what I wrote. The point is there's an argument that with respect to bathrooms that the narrow tailoring can be changed, short of having people have to go into separate rooms. But coming soon to a courtroom near you. Any other questions on the Craig V Boren or the Frontiero case? All right, let's do the next case. Let's do Virginia. So the next case involves the Virginia Military Institute, which is a public college in Virginia, which trains people for the military, as the name would suggest. This is actually a picture, which will be in the next edition of the book, which shows some of the first female cadets that graduated from the program. This is one of my favorite pictures, which is also in the book. It's Justices Scalia and Ginsburg riding an elephant. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. They went to India on vacation, and they're riding an elephant. So I have this line in the third edition that says, they often find themselves on opposite sides of the case, but here they found themselves on the same side of an elephant. So it was a decent caption. Rachel.
Yeah.
Give me the facts, please, in VMI.
Okay, so VMI was the sole single-sex school.
Whoa! Tongue twister.
I didn't realize I wrote that.
Yeah.
Among like 15 public institutions in Virginia, their whole goal was to produce citizen soldiers.
Citizen soldiers, right?
Yeah.
This is Sparta, right?
Yeah. So for the to be like leaders for the future, they had this method, the adversative method, and it was all about pushing like these citizen soldiers to their absolute like physical and mental anxiety limit. It's basically like law school.
Is that what you wrote in your notes?
No. So they sued in district court, and after that, the state decided to go ahead and make their own like separate VMI, but only for women. It was inferior though. In some ways, it didn't have the adversative method. Some of the teachers didn't possess as many PhDs as the other VMI. And they had fewer courses, I think. So basically, then it went up to the Supreme Court, and they determined that it was unconstitutional.
Very good. Okay, very good rendition of the facts. Thank you. So, has anyone here actually gone through military academy or boot camp or anything like this? No one. You should have one or two. Okay, so who's raised your hand?
Yeah, Eric wasn't raised.
Oh, Eric. Oh, he's not here today. What a shame. Okay. Well, I'll ask him about it in class on next week. But I think it's very much unlike law school because I don't make you do push-ups if you get your answer wrong. The purpose of this program, as the opinion describes, is to basically break people down. And if you push them hard enough, they recognize what their limits actually are. Right? So more often than not, when you think, oh, I can't do that, you actually probably could, but your brain's telling you can't, so you stop. The purpose of these programs is to basically break you and recognize, oh, I can do that, I can do that. And then you know what your actual limits are, so you can stop yourself before you kill yourself. But this adversative method is designed to build physical rigor and create these Spartan warriors, right, to fight in our nation's military. At the time this case was decided, West Point, that's the Army Academy, the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, the Air Force Academy in Colorado, all the other service academies had already integrated. They had men and women in their ranks. I think at the time VMI was the last sole sex, what was it, Rachel?
Sole single sex school.
Sole single sex school, right. I think it was the last one at this time. Thank you. And it was challenged as a violation of the 14th Amendment by a number of female cadets. Now, why is the case called United States versus VMI? Because the U.S. government joined the lawsuit, but it was originally brought by several female cadets in the Virginia who wanted to attend this institution. Now, as Rachel said, they tried building a separate academy, right? It was at Mary Baldwin College, which was nearby, but it wasn't the same. And does anyone know what case it might remind you of?
Plessy.
Well, Plessy, something related to it. It's a Texas case. Across town.
Burn?
No. How about 3 miles from here?
Oh,
TSR.
Good Marshall, yeah.
Sweaty Painter, right? Where UT would not integrate their school into black students. Texas built Thurgood, well, it's now called Thurgood Marshall, but Texas Southern Law School. And the Supreme Court said, oh, that's nice, the school's not equal, right? It might be separate, but it's not equal. So here, VMI actually tried to build an ancillary, a secondary institution for the female cadets to enroll in. That didn't work. All right, so Jessica, walk me through Justice Ginsburg's opinion here. Oh, what a good word. What's a exceedingly persuasive standard?
She doesn't really define it, but I think it sounds more like strict.
Okay, very good. So, but does she purport to apply intermediate scrutiny?
Yes.
Okay. So, if you ask her, you say, look, we're applying intermediate scrutiny, but what's the phrase, exceedingly persuasive? Would you say it again, please?
Exceedingly persuasive.
Okay. So, she has a standard, right, that the justification must be exceedingly persuasive. You framed it exactly right. If you go back to our test from Craig V Boren, it's got to be an important governmental interest and have a substantial relationship. But she says exceedingly, right, persuasive. That's probably somewhere between compelling and important, right? it's not just important, it's exceedingly persuasive. So what, at least my reading, I think Scalia probably does the same, is Ginsburg moves the goalpost a bit. And she says it's not enough to just have an important governmental interest. It must be exceedingly persuasive, right? So, Daniel, what is the government's interest in having this separate military academy for only male students? Okay, now is that a legitimate state interest?
Well, I'm saying no, just because it's military is more of a national thing than a state.
So you don't think it's legitimate?
No.
Okay. Do you think it's important? Do you think it's legitimate for a state to have a law school?
Sure, they can have a law school.
Well, why can't they have a military school?
Well, they can have a military school. I still think it's legitimate.
Why not? Yeah, but you have a state militia.
What power
National Guard.
Oh, I guess.
You're talking about hyperweight divide, right? Is there a legitimate reason why states want to have people for their own National Guard to be strong soldiers?
Yeah, it's like that.
Okay. Is it important, perhaps, for a state to have this militia, this military academy?
I don't know how important that would be.
Is it exceedingly persuasive that they need this? Is it compelling? Okay, so see what he just did there, right? Is it legitimate? After you thought a little bit, yes. Is it important? Maybe, maybe not. Is it exceedingly persuasive? Probably not. Is it compelling? No way, right? So as you ratchet up the intensity for the government's interest, it becomes harder and harder to survive. So if you're just applying, is it important for the state to have this sole single-sex school, right? The answer is maybe. Maybe yes, maybe no. But when you get this new exceedingly persuasive justification standard that Ginsburg employs, it becomes much tougher to meet the threshold. Right? So that's the state interest, right? Elizabeth, let's look at the relationship, right? Does Virginia need to have sole single-sex education to make these soldiers, these Spartan sole single-sex students?
I don't know what they're making, yeah. I think that they said something about, and I think it might be true, that there is something to be said about education being just one gender. There is some education.
Was that Ginsburg or is that Scalia? Okay, the state, yeah, the state's arguing this, right? But does the court think that they need to have this sole single-sex Spartan spirit soldier student education experience? No, they don't. Why not? What does Ginsburg say here?
If some women are capable and some are not.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. Bingo. Perfect, exactly. You can't go with stereotypes, right? It may be true that a large percentage of women can't meet this adversative method, but some could, right? And indeed, I showed you the picture. Female graduates made it through the program. So what Ginsburg's saying, right? What Ginsburg's saying here is that you can't base on stereotypes. Unless the school can demonstrate that this method won't work with women, they have to at least try. Now, Zach, let me ask you a follow-up question. What if the school comes in and says, you know what? We can't do this with women. We're going to have to water down our program for everyone. Right? We're going to have to water it down. We can't have this sort of rigor program, right? What's the answer then? Is that the state have to just water down their program? Make the standards easier to qualify?
Probably not.
Oh, so what did you say? Hear your answer.
Probably yes.
Why probably yes?
Kind of the only thing they can do because they can't make a whole other school.
Yeah. So this goes back to our standard, right? Since it's not really that important or exceedingly persuasive to have this program in the first place, if their soldiers are a little bit less Spartan, what's the big deal? So the effect of this, right? The effect of this is saying, because you don't really have that strong of an interest in doing this in the first place, the equality principle trumps it. And under this equality principle, you're required to have a very good reason to justify it. Okay? and the burden belongs with the state. Crystal.
Couldn't an argument be made though that there's a job that has to be done? Like you're gonna have to walk 5 miles, and if women can only walk 3 miles and men can walk the full 5, then can the job actually get done? Kind of like with firefighters. Like if women can't climb a 50-story building, but men can.
That's one of the reasons why there's so much litigation with fire departments. The test, if you ever look up the basic training for the firefighters, they have to carry basically a dummy of a certain weight up a certain number of stairs. And you can't vary that test, because if you're rescuing someone from a burning building and you have to carry a person down the steps, you have to carry them down the steps. So in New York, there are some females who have failed the test over and over again, and they basically are allowed to keep taking it. So this point of watering down standards perhaps works in a military academy, but in all applications it might not. Oh, sorry, Crystal, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. In boot camp, would it then? Like, does this, how does that work?
My understanding of boot camp is they often have different standards for female and male cadets. I'm sorry, Eric's not here. You can probably speak to that. Mark?
Well, the other side to that coin would be that, men with larger stature typically aren't able to get into tight spaces the way that a female could. Right?
Good point.
So there's a place for both sides.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I can't carry anymore, guys. If you're in trouble, I'm screwed. You're screwed. If I have to rescue you, guys are done. I got nothing. You don't want me helping you out. But Ginsburg's point is you can't rely on generalizations. That doesn't have a close enough relationship. So, in a sense, this follows from Craig V Boren, right? In Craig V Boren, these generalizations about women being safer drivers, that didn't apply. Likewise here, you can't rely on generalizations. But it goes beyond that with this new exceedingly persuasive justification standard. Okay, everyone with me so far? Kevin, by the way, Justice Thomas did not participate in this case. You know why? His son went to VMI. So it was only Scalia lonely dissent. Kevin, what's Scalia all alone ranting about here?
So one of the first things he touched on was the history of people. How
the history of people?
Yes.
Oh, I like that. History of people, good.
How Justice Ginsburg just ignored this aspect of it. And how the school always admitted men, and how that was always one of their purposes of doing it, because it reflects the uniform practice of the government-supported military colleges during that time. So that was one of the aspects he touched on. Another part of it was intermediate scrutiny. And right before that, he clarified all the different 3 standards. And then with immediate scrutiny, he said that it falls in between the rational and the strict, which is what Ginsburg did with the persuasion technique. Yeah,
very good. So the Scalia dissent here says that this is a very significant departure from how things have always been, right, which is not necessarily a reason to keep things. He also describes that under the tiers of scrutiny, that intermediate scrutiny is not strict scrutiny, and that this exceedingly persuasive standard employed by the majority looks an awful lot like strict scrutiny. Okay? Scalia writes, whatever standard you apply, though, VMI should win. All that's required is a substantial relationship. He writes, it is beyond question that Virginia has an important, see the word he uses, an important state interest in providing effective college education. That single-sex instruction is an approach substantially related to that interest should be evidenced from the long and continuing history in this country of men and women's colleges. He writes, if you force the school to integrate men and women, they'll have to drop their advertitive method. This is what Zach said, they have to water it down. This is not required by the Constitution, Scalia writes. Okay. So there are a few points he raises, right? We have the affirmative action cases, which were decided after this, where the schools get deference, right? When the schools are making racial classifications, they are allowed to be, they get deference. because they decide that certain benefits that flow from this are justified. David?
Yeah, but you're hitting on what I've been thinking the whole time. It's like, could they not argue with the one case where it's beneficially educationally beneficial to, diversify the school? Can you, I guess, argue the
Undiversified.
Undiversified and have only men, and it can have, an educational benefit, or an all-girls school will have it.
You stole my next question, but thank you very much.
Educational benefit, and I don't see why they. I guess I don't think they've raised that argument here. They didn't go with the education.
Yeah.
And they did say the adversarial whatever was their was the concept, but it seems like a gender-based affirmative action.
A reverse gender-based affirmative action, though. So I think, David stole my next question, so I'll ask it now, as I was going to. In the Grutter case, right, they say we're going to defer to the education. If they're acting in good faith to promote whatever benefits flow from this policy, it'll be okay. Now, Brandon, what's perhaps would Justice Ginsburg reply to that if you were to ask her that question? Just take a guess. How would Justice Ginsburg reply to that question?
I would think she wouldn't like it.
She probably wouldn't like it, but what would her response be? How would Ginsburg distinguish the University of Michigan's law school's policy from the from the VMI policy, along the lines of David's question?
Gosh, conceptually, I'm having a hard time thinking of her. It's not persuasive justification.
Okay. Amber, want to take a step?
Well, she talked a lot about how they only put 4 to 15% of the people that even go to the military, and how there's already a bunch of schools that had already made it where women and men were together. So there was no real reason why it shouldn't increase their ability to educate them even better.
That's good. Not that I was thinking of David. What would Ginsburg say to distinguish the VMI anti-diversity thing that David mentioned, right, and the Michigan Law School affirmative action policy? How do you think she would respond to David's question?
Well, one being about race.
Well, that's true, but more than that. You're on the right track.
One is trying to be more inclusive, the other one is exclusive.
Bingo. I think that's the answer, right? David, that makes sense? Yeah, I think what Ginsburg would reply to that is, look, here you're keeping women out. In Michigan, you're letting in minorities. But what would Abby Fisher say to that? Right? What would Barbara Grutter say? What would Gratz say to that? They say they're keeping me out because my skin color. Right? The nature of the affirmative action cases is you have the white people saying, hey, you're keeping us out. And here you have female students saying, hey, you're keeping us out. Now, this is not a blanket ban on denying entrance to certain people, whereas a VMI there was. So it's just that you can't come in if you're a female. But there's this long simmering tension in the protection. Is it a benign classification, or is it an exclusionary classification? Ginsburg would say the Michigan program is benign, it's helping people. VMI was exclusionary. Right? I think that's the difference. Does that make a little sense?
Yeah, and then also Scalia talked about with private schools and how they receive federal funding.
Oh, yeah.
And is this going to have a precedent on those schools? And, when I was reading this, I was thinking of, Howard and Spelman, which are, predominantly black male and black female schools, and that's pretty much all they let in. And it's, he was kind of, I guess, worried that this would set precedent that no school would be unique enough. And
so Scalia, I think his creative marbles didn't quite come through. This case is almost 20-something years old now. There's not been widespread efforts to shut down single-sex schools. In fact, there's some pretty decent social science research which suggests that people in lower grades learn better in male-only, female-only schools. I'm not endorsing it, but there's some science here. But what Scalia is saying is, if we take this seriously, single-sex single-sex education becomes hard to justify. He also raises sports teams, like does the Ohio State football team have to include female applicants, right? You have Title IX, which is for athletics, right? But you have a female basketball team and a male basketball team. There's no female football team, right? You have baseball and you have softball, right? There's no female baseball team. So even there, it's not a perfectly equivalent program. Yeah, Mark.
So I wrote down also that there was a bit of an issue between Ginsburg's dissent in Grates versus
Gratz,
excuse me, where like, you know, wink, wink, nod, nod, you know, honesty being the best policy. And, you know, this kind of seems to be contrary, right? Because she's moving past, you know, some of the clear physical differences that exist, but yet there should be an equal.
Well, I don't think she's moving past the physical differences. Her point is it's not enough to justify the policy. And if you need to water down the standards, then water down the standards. In other words, the cost of excluding females is greater than laying them in with lower standards. So let them in, let them graduate, but don't make the standards the same. I think she'll say it's a better policy. It's more narrowly tailored, right? Think of the suit, right? It's better to let them in with lower standards than to keep them at period. So she's not ignoring the physicality issue. She actually does not ignore it to her credit. She acknowledges you'll need separate showers, you'll need separate quarters. Mm-hmm. But that's what tailoring is about. You have to tailor the program to fit with what the intermediate test requires.
Basically, Virginia can slow down. There's no compelling reason for you guys to put out these.
There's no
Spartans.
important reason to have these Spartan soldiers in the first place.
Right.
So if you want to do it, you got to do it comporting with the intermediate test.
So then making the standards harder, so women have a harder chance of getting in, would that be?
That would not be narrowly tailored, right? And I don't think they'll be making it harder. If they impose the same standards, the flunking rate would be probably too high, and it wouldn't work. In other words, as a general matter, schools should not admit people who they think will not graduate, law schools and otherwise, right? So if you're admitting people who you think won't graduate, that's not a good program to have. You don't want to set students up to fail. You have a bell curve. Some students always will fail. It happens. It's a curve, but not our fault. David?
So, since there hasn't been this widespread like closing down or
it hasn't really happened.
A private school, if VMI was to suddenly become private, they could possibly return to their previous.
Yeah. So there's a school called the Citadel, I think in South Carolina. It's a military academy, and I think they're still male only. But it does. I mean, David alluded to this. They do get federal money, and it's in a weird spot for college being single sex. They still do exist.
Yeah, I was just going to say that school you talked about them getting federal money, so even private schools that get federal money could be eventually.
Could be. I mean, it hasn't happened because Congress hasn't gone after them, but it's entirely feasible under law that could be shut down.
How do they justify public schools that are just one gender, represented by one gender, is unconstitutional?
They still exist. We still have public schools that are single gender. That exist today. I don't even know.
Yeah.
I suppose the answer is in Virginia there's only one military academy which girls can go to, whereas in HISD there are how many elementary schools, right? So perhaps the tailoring issue is a little bit different, right? Maybe you in fact do have an all boys school and all girls school with equal levels of education. Perhaps that's one way of justifying it. Elizabeth?
I have a question about schools. You said something about how if people want this to change, they should go to like their elected officials or whatever.
Yeah.
But isn't this U.S. versus Virginia?
I mentioned this a moment ago. This case was originally brought by a few female students who wanted to admit, and then the U.S. government, the Clinton administration, filed suit on top of that. Basically, the U.S. government was suing Virginia institution.
Yeah, I thought like that implied that the elected officials like were.
No. Congress does not control what Virginia does. But this was a suit brought by the U.S. government on behalf of female students. Make sense?
Yeah, I was going to say like it's the state themselves that chose them to take action.
Yeah, Virginia got sued. They could have said, okay, we give up, we're going to change our school, but they were defending their institution. Any other questions on BMI? All right, so this is an important case which you have to know. I think it's fairly safe to say that this moved the goalposts, and under this test, important should probably best be read to mean exceedingly persuasive. Okay. Any other questions on VMI? David?
That sounds like super sexist, but also when you brought up the Justice Brandeis part about how, you know, that they're supposed to like encourage states to experiment and things like that, it just felt, to me, it just felt like Supreme Court stepping on states' rights. And, but, I mean, is that not, I guess, the state's police power to create, I mean,
well, that goes to the justification, right? Scalia says, of course it's important for state to have this military category, that's within the police power. And Ginter's like, yeah, it's not really that important, and it's certainly not exceedingly persuasive. Right? But if you remember Thomas in the Gruner case said, there's no reason why a state should have a law school. There are several private law schools in Michigan, right? And half the students leave Michigan anyway. They don't even stay there to study. Right? So it cuts both ways what the important justification is. Any other questions on BMI? Brandon?
I feel like Scalia's basically saying all these tests are like nonsense. Basically,
yeah.
Basically what you guys are doing, he calls them self-righteous. The self-righteous Supreme Court. Basically, what you're doing is you're just imposing your own, you're writing your own beliefs into the Constitution. Is that a fair assessment of what he
yes.
is saying?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's exactly what Scalia is saying here. The Constitution doesn't speak of scrutiny, right? There's nothing in the Constitution that says racial classification is one way, gender classification is the other way. It's not in the Constitution. The 14th Amendment says persons, not black, white, not male, female, persons cannot be denied the equal protection of the laws. So this entire construct of scrutiny is made up. This is why Justice Stevens describes it as there's only one equal protection clause. It applies the same to everyone. But for better or worse, the court has carved this up into different categories, daylight categories. And it's not even just for the justices to apply, but imagine you're a lower court judge and you're looking for guidance. This is currently designed to give lower court judges some template of how to move, but they're not strict. They're very fluid. Kevin?
So this is basically just politics.
No, I did not say that. I did not say that at all.
There's the one statement in Scalia saying this is politics smuggled into law.
Well, Scalia said, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
I'll say a little bit differently than my dear brother Nino. There's no basis in the Constitution for this, right? But I wouldn't go as far as say it's politics. The justices, I think, are trying to provide a framework that lower court judges can apply with some consistency. That's one of the jobs of the justice to not just decide the current case, but to put forward something that the lower court judges can apply. Scalia was fond of calling it politics. You'll read the Bergefell decision in a few weeks, and he describes the majority as 5 lawyers, not 5 judges, but 5 lawyers, which is a very shade, as they said. Anything else on VMI? All right, let's do the last case. The last case doesn't really fit anywhere, right? It doesn't really fit anywhere. It's not about gender. It's not about race. It's about disability. And what did we say earlier today, right? If your racial classification goes in the suspect bucket. If you have a gender classification, goes in the quasi-suspect bucket. But everything else, right, all other non-suspect classifications, such as age, disability, is reviewed under the rational basis standard. Cleburne versus Cleburne Living Center, 1985, doesn't really fit in that rubric. It doesn't apply rational basis review as we've studied it. And this is one of a couple of decisions that starts doing it. This is why I tell you this framework is lovely to study, but it doesn't really matter anymore. Because the last 20 or 25 years, the court has moved away from this standard. So, who's next? Boone, you next? Give me the facts, please, in Cleburne.
So these people are trying to set up an assisted living home for mentally challenged people,
Oh, you're more gentle when you say mentally challenged. Good for you.
Well, I didn't want people to like start freaking out or anything.
No, no. This actually the word used is mentally retarded. They actually still use this word in opinions, and if you read death penalty cases, they still use this word. But I appreciate your your thesaurus for the day. Yeah. So go on.
Okay. So the ordinance said they had to do zoning and stuff, and they
do zoning and stuff. I'm a property professor. My God, give me more. Zoning stuff. No, give me more. I will not accept that as an answer. I taught zoning this morning. Please, give me more.
It wouldn't let them.
Yes.
Put their home in that area.
Very good.
Okay. For all kind of reasons, but
okay. Zoning and stuff. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Very good.
Zoning and stuff.
You didn't take property 2 yet, so I'll let you look for that. You'll learn this stuff soon enough. Okay. So under property law, which you'll study, I guess, next term, if you want to build something, you generally need to ask the government for permission. And in this case, they're required to seek a special permit, what's called a special use permit, to construct a home for the mentally retarded, as they say. The city denied the permit. Then a lawsuit was brought challenging this as a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. So, Brittany, how do we classify, or what sort of classification is that issue here?
The issue is classifying it under quasi-suspect?
Well, what do the plaintiffs want to classify this as, right?
As more general.
If you're, okay, so Brittany, let me ask the question like this. You're a lawyer for the home, right? For this group home. How are you going to try and tell the judge to classify your clients?
Oh, they want to do it under a stricter, under strict scrutiny.
Right, very good, thank you. So if you're the lawyer for the home, you're going to say, look, our people are these mentally retarded people, these mentally handicapped people. These are either a suspect class or maybe a quasi-suspect class. Now, is there any case law, Brittany, suggesting that these people are quasi-suspect or suspect before this? No, there's not, right? So there's no case law. But you're going to argue it anyway. Okay, Alyssa, now you're the lawyer for the city of Cleburne, right? What standard do you want to argue applies here?
The rational basis.
Exactly, right. And why, if you're the city, right, why do you want the rational basis review to apply here?
Because, as you said earlier, under rational basis, the government almost always wins.
Perfectly stated, right? If you're the government lawyer, you want rational basis review because you're saying, look, the government always wins. So the court does something strange here, right? Kelsey, does the court find that mentally disabled are a suspect or a quasi-suspect class?
No.
They don't.
Consider that if there was a rational purpose, they would have put them in that category, but there isn't one. So.
Yeah. So this is the weird part of the case. Let me break this down for you. The court says that they're not a quasi-suspect class. They're a non-suspect class. Therefore, we're in rational basis review. However, they don't apply it as they normally do. They apply it with a stringency, with a strictness that's not conventional. Right? So Cortland, right? You're a government lawyer. And you want to defend denying the permit to this home of mentally handicapped people, right? What reasons do you give under rational basis review? Why would you not want these people living in a residential community?
I think they said that they might experience negative reaction from the community.
Good, like what?
Like high school kids maybe vandalizing the property or giving the residents a hard time.
Yeah, and what else? What about the I call them inmates, the guests, the residents of this home as well? What risk might be there for them being there?
They could be mentally unstable and cause drama.
Trauma, yeah, I like that. It could hurt people, right? So if you're a government lawyer, Cortland, you're saying, look, having a home in our residential community with these mentally handicapped people They can hurt someone, they can be off their meds, they can escape the house, right? Maybe the teenager starts vandalizing their property. I mean, there's lots of bad stuff can happen. Is that enough to survive rational basis review?
Yes.
Yeah, it's stereotyping, right? You're going to simply say, as a stereotypical matter, people with these mental conditions are dangerous, they hurt someone, they may create a burden on the community, they may, like, wander the streets and, require ambulance service, right? That would usually be enough for rational basis review. Not so here. Mark, what does the court do here? What's the analysis?
Well, this was kind of confusing because they gave the set of reasons why it should be rational basis and then a set of reasons why it should be quasi-suspect. They ultimately held, right, that the Court of Appeals was wrong to use the intermediate scrutiny, but they also upheld their ruling in that what the zoning regulations that they applied upon the appellee was wrong, and so it was kind of a confusing.
It is.
Holding.
It's a confusing opinion. Let me see if I can try to summarize it for you a bit. What they're effectively saying is the sorts of reasons that were justified here, concern about property value, right? Fear of the residents, the high school students that Cortland mentioned here, right? Those reasons aren't good enough. They say the real reason is a rational prejudice against the mentally retarded. This is like if you want to use Yik Wo as an example, right? That the reason given is different than the actual reason. That all this stuff about fearing mental retardation and fearing the high school kids, whatever else, that's bogus. That the actual reason is a rational prejudice. This standard is often called rational basis plus, or rational basis with bite. It's the notion that in certain cases the court looks a little bit more closely. Now, they don't go ahead and just call it a quasi-suspect class, right? We're not saying as a general matter all classifications based on disability are subject to this heightened review. What they're saying is, in this case, we will, right? Now, the court doesn't want to recognize new suspect classes. They just don't do it anymore. This is why I'm telling you this framework has lost its potency. So what they simply say is, well, we're not going to recognize mental retardation as a suspect class, but we're going to apply intermediate scrutiny anyway. Stereotypes about mentally handicapped people are not going to cut it. You need to have a very specific reason why you're denying them this permit. And you haven't studied property law yet, property 2 yet at least. And what you'll study next semester is generally zoning boards can do whatever the hell they want. They get a lot of deference. So this case was very significant, right? Crystal, what's Justice Marshall saying in his concurring opinion? It was Marshall, Brennan, and Blackman. What are they saying there?
They're basically saying that, sorry, I have to get forward. They're basically saying that even though they use quasi-suspect, that they're using rational basis. They're saying that there's no difference between these categories, basically.
Yeah, what Marshall's saying is they're basically using the search and inquiry, right? And the refusal to acknowledge this is problematic. So in other words, stop fronting, right? Stop pretending this is rational basis review, because it's not. And by calling this rational basis review, you're actually watering down what should be a deferential standard. That's Marshall and Brennan, right? This is a good segue and a good transition point. Because as I said earlier, and you probably didn't believe me, the court has more or less moved away from the tiers of scrutiny. They just don't use them anymore. And you'll see this in an important way when we do the LGBT cases in the next couple of weeks. The court's never gone ahead and said, yes, sexual orientation is a suspect class or a quasi-suspect class. They just haven't done it. Instead, they just use this for free-floating look, this free-floating review to find animus and hatred. And they say, there's an irrational prejudice behind this. It's unconstitutional. Okay? So questions on Cleaver, right? It's some of a one-off case where even though they're not recognizing a new quasi-suspect class, they're still giving it a very, very rigorous review. Under a rational basis review, the city's decision here would stand, no problem passed. But when you go to this higher scrutiny, it doesn't stand a chance.
So even though they're moving away from the tiers of scrutiny, the test question says, in present day, we still...
Oh, don't you want to answer that question? Well, let me ask you this. If you go to the Fifth Circuit down 2 blocks that way, right? And a judge on the Fifth Circuit asks you, so what tier of scrutiny are you in? And you tell them, well, Your Honor, Justice Kennedy doesn't really like tiers of scrutiny. That's the wrong answer. So the short answer to your question is, Cleveland's still good law, right? VMI is still good law. Bergerfeld's also still good law. So your challenge is to try to figure out how these pieces interact. I get this question every semester. There's no good answer for your question. Because if you're a lawyer, in a couple years you won't pass the bar. And if you go to the district court, you go to the circuit court, you're going to talk about scrutiny. When you go to the Supreme Court, you're going to talk about scrutiny. And when Justice Kennedy writes his opinion, he won't talk about scrutiny. But he may not be in the court much longer, so who knows? Those cases are still good law, you have to know them all. Other questions? Yes, David?
So, in Cleveland, where the court looked at the example of like, hey, they don't apply the same zoning permits to hospitals or sanitariums and everything like that. That's actually the court using the more stringent.
Yeah.
And so they...
It's requiring narrow tailoring. Well, you give them the permit, but not this guy the permit, right?
So did they kind of create like almost a fourth?
Oh, don't even. Yeah, I mean, that's
like
what...
in between
so...
rational basis and quasi-suspect.
So what some people call it is rational basis plus, or rational basis with bite. I don't like using this phrase because I don't think it means anything because the court never actually acknowledged it. The court said, we are applying rational basis with bite, right? There's no holding the court ever saying that. But a lot of scholars, at least in the 80s and 90s, suggest that there was a fourth carve-out right there. That is there. Exactly.
And then when kind of Ginsburg went between quasi...
Yeah, right. So let's do it. So there's a fifth one, right? So now there's the exceedingly persuasive, right? I think that's what you were asking. So now there are 5 standards, right? Which is why I'm telling you, this was never meant to last, right? You're already seeing, like they make these categories, and they make an exception here, they make an exception there. They added, it was like platform 7 3/4, right? Or from Harry Potter, or 9 3/4. Thank you. I actually went there. I was at King's Cross Station. They actually have a trolley, which is like those carts, which is like bolted to the wall, and you can like run into it. Yeah, David.
So are these tests supposed to be, I guess, tests for violation of due process, or?
So you'll study in the next few classes the phrase strict scrutiny and rational basis has very different meanings for equal protection and due process, right? When you study Williamson v. Lee Optical, it was really a due process case, the optician case, right? So the phrase rational basis and due process means something different than in equal protection. You'll study next week the abortion cases, right? Strict scrutiny in the context of due process means something different than strict scrutiny and equal protection. And just you wait. Abortion cases are not governed by strict scrutiny. They're governed by the undue burden standard, right? So there's even a third standard you have to memorize. And Justice Kennedy doesn't like that either. But dignity. That's another hand. So all of this is a beautiful way of explaining that these tiers of scrutiny are hardly that. They're not consistently applied. But you still got to know them, right? You still got to know them. On any exam question, ask yourselves, what is the classification? Which bucket does it fall into? Based on what bucket it falls into, you have to know your tier of scrutiny. And it's not just rewrite the exam. Is it rational, related, to legitimate government? If you write that, you get like 6 or 7 points. If you want to get your A, you have to explain why is this legitimate. Okay? What does it mean to be rational related? That's where you get yourself to a high score. Okay? Anything else? Your exams will be ready on Monday. Thank you very much. I will see you on Tuesday.